I gotta tell you, I'm really excited for this, and I should warn you, I'm a gusher, and it gets uncomfortable sometimes.
Welcome to Beyond the Canvas, the podcast where we peel back the layers of creativity and explore the vibrant minds behind the art. It's more than just a glimpse at their art, it's a deep dive into the heart of what makes them tick.
Okay, so this is Chloe Gendron out of Canada, and I am so beyond thrilled that she's allowed me to talk with her today. Chloe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let folks know whatever you want them to know?
What can I say? I'm a self-employed artist. I guess you could consider me a social media artist and instructor. And what I mean by social media artist is that I don't do commercial work, I don't do commissions, and most of the art pieces that I do, like the final art pieces, I work with a gallery, an exclusive gallery actually out in Glasgow in the UK. I do art and I explain how the steps that I've taken in the process to achieve the art, and I film it and share those insights on YouTube. And then once the artwork is finished, I send it over to the gallery and they take care of selling it. And once the art has been purchased, then I hold copyright and I can make prints or I could do whatever I want. But it's a pretty smooth process, and that allows me to work based on my own vision as opposed to realizing the vision of someone else, such as a client. And so I think I'm in a unique situation, kind of like a dream situation, if someone's goal is basically just to make cool art, talk about cool art, and do nothing else.
Well, you definitely make cool art. There were two things that really attracted me to your YouTube channel, and that was my introduction to you. YouTube told me I should watch you, and YouTube was right. The first part is you do pen and ink, and it's so clean. It's one of the reasons I love pen and ink. And the other reason is your influences are wild. I was just looking, you've got stuff from Frank Frazetta. You did a study on Michael Moorcock's titular character. I mean, you've got Leyendecker. It's incredible. Can you talk a bit about how you got to being the artist? Because if I understand correctly, you were a graphic artist and then took some time off and then jumped back into art.
Yeah, I'll start from the beginning because people always say, "What do you mean you just started drawing like 3 years ago? That doesn't make sense." And that's because I did start drawing as a child and I was self-taught as a child. And my influences were French graphic novels, like what we call comic books. And I drew this way basically by copying and reading comic books till I published my own. I was approached by the Language Institute I was living in Saskatchewan at the time. I was 14, yeah, 14, and they commissioned me to illustrate the story of Le Géant Edouard Beaupré, who's like this dude. He grew to about 8 feet tall in the prairies, and they talk about him in schools, and they wanted an illustrated book or a comic book. And so I partnered with the historian, and I illustrated the book, and it got distributed in schools in both Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And I was in high school, and
Wow.
then right away I got commissioned for a second book. Same type of idea. It was about the French colonists who immigrated to the prairies in the early, I don't know, late 1800s, and I illustrated the book for that. And those two books helped me to get into graphic design school. And I went to graphic design school with the idea of becoming an illustrator, and I was aspiring to do comic books. And as you start working in the industry, you realize kind of quickly that illustration is sort of like 2% of the kind of jobs you can get, especially when you're junior. and the workplace, I kind of landed a really great job right away where they paid me higher than industry. They gave me lots of independence, and I ended up sort of like growing a studio within this crown corporation, which was kind of unheard of. And I ended up being the manager of like a group of 10 people. And so my career grew so fast. I never did an illustration, and I sort of, I wouldn't say I lost my way, but I lost, my eye wasn't on the prize anymore. Did not become an illustrator. I became a leader of people and a trainer, basically. And I just switched careers. I went back to university and I did a master's in leadership and training and immediately jumped. My first job was working for the Olympics, actually, the organizing committee for the Winter Olympics in Vancouver. And so unfortunately, I kind of I liked it so much it burnt out. And in 2020, sort of 2019, 2020, like around that time where everyone was having um, epiphanies about their dreams
Mhm.
and lives and what they were doing with life, I took about 8 months of like extended disability leave, um, diagnosed with professional burnout. And I was at that time that I started drawing again, and I just, wow, like why don't I give this another go? But this time, I'm gonna do it right. I'm gonna really focus on my passion, what gives me passion, which is learning how to draw and sharing that with others. And yeah, pen and ink was the medium that I gravitated to. I kind of went right away, like got a website in 2022, and I didn't start YouTube till the following year. And I think that was a good move rather than start with YouTube right away because I needed that extra time to get my art up, like to a certain level where people were actually interested in, oh wow, how do I do that? Like how do I excel, in that short amount of time? Like what's your trick? What's the clues?
That is the thing that kept me coming, by the way. There's so many, resources out there on the internet, YouTube and other places. And what I've noticed is that a lot of them say the same thing and they don't say it very well. Yours is
Mhm.
very, very, very different. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to learning?
Yeah. Um, My personal approach is based on my preference, and I approach things from a place of logic, and it's very sequential. And I think that's also transferred from my past work, and there's always a bit of a process of, you start with ideation, like brainstorming. What am I going to draw? What's inspiring me? Like, where does the sort of like the essence of what you're trying to communicate visually, like what's that going to look like? And so there's the first step is research, sort of gathering visuals, maybe like going out in nature and sketching things, but basically like you're mining for ideas. And then the step after that is refining the idea. Of course, in the workplace, so when you work with a client, you're refining that idea with someone else. But if you're working with a client, you're always trying to get them to, it's kind of like, how do you visually interpret an idea? How do you translate what you see onto paper for someone else to be able to understand your intention with it? And I guess that's the process of how I create the art. And that's how I teach it. I'm like, you get your idea, you refine your ideas, and then you do a bit of decision of, problem solving before you jump to the inks. You figure out all the how are you going to piece this together so that it's readable for someone else to understand what you're trying to communicate? And that's when all the art fundamentals come in. Like how do you express shape in a way that someone within 2 seconds knows exactly that, wow, that's a dog, just by looking at the outline or the silhouette of it. How do you give it form? What techniques are we going to use to give that object form? In what style? what styles are natural to you, what styles are you inspired by, where will you how will you develop that? And so it's I kind of have that process where it brings up questions for people who are like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or why don't I try that? Oh, that's what I need to practice in order to be able to do the kind of art that inspires me, that inspires others, that tells a story. And it's like, yeah, this is exactly what I meant to put out in the world.
I'll make sure it's on the website for this, a link to your the checklist you have. Few things have spoken to me as much as that has, because it does it in a visual way that makes sense and really directs you, royal you, to know how to do those things. I gotta ask though, what's up with you and ravens?
Well, happened was when I was having my epiphany, I happened to be living near a bird estuary, and it's in a special place. It was in Squamish, BC,
Mm,
and exactly where I was where the melt from the mountain turns into a river and flows into the ocean. And a lot of migrating birds would come and visit there. So there was so much variety. And I never used to pay attention to them until I lived there. And yeah, some huge ravens. I've never seen ravens up close, like alpine ravens. They're the size of an eagle. They're just monstrous.
that's
And
awesome.
they're just such clever creatures. And I don't know, I just spent a lot of time with them and just got attached. Then I started taking a sketchbook on my walks and just doodling the birds, and that's that's where that grew. But also when I was a child, one of the graphic novels that I was addicted to is called Targal, and it's the story of a Viking. Well, it's actually an alien who gets found. He gets found adopted by a Viking family, and he grows up as a Viking. And I followed his stories, and then I just got really into the Norse history. And I was
Mm.
also very much into Nordic skiing and pretty much anything Scandinavian. And I spent some time in Sweden. And so, yeah, it's just kind of all in there.
Can you just talk a little bit more about some of the comics you loved growing up and some you like really now?
Yeah, of course, I would say that evolved, and in the way that now I appreciate the stories as well. But when growing up, I really just looked at the art, and I was drawn to a more realistic, quite detailed style.
Mm.
And that's that's kind of taken me down the path of, and what I would the same advice I would give to other artists is like, start studying the masters. Start with your favorites and then do research to find out who they were influenced by. And so I loved Rosinski. He was the illustrator I admired. And then when I started doing more serious studies and I looked into, well, who were his influences, and of course it was like Mobius, Jean
Mm.
Giraud, and he's influenced by Franklin Booth, who was influenced by Doré, who was influenced by Albrecht Dürer, and so you just kind of follow the breadcrumbs, and that's what then you start to spot the line work. And now I pick up, any manga, any comic, and I go, oh, that's a Wrightson. Oh, that's a line that
Awesome.
Frazetta does. Oh, like I start to recognize the strokes, and of course we boil the styles here and there, and some come more naturally. And so when you talk about me having clean lines, and like the transition of values, that's all Booth. I mean, I love and believe Booth, and Booth was one of the influences of the comic books that I grew up with and admired, like Enki Bilal and well, that whole group from the Metal Hurlant, the Howling Metal, or I can't remember the name of the magazine, but like those French comic book artists.
I don't think I've seen anybody do it quite like you in terms of YouTube content. Um, there's lots of folks who talk about the masters and they may mention the masters, but you actually have a few videos that explicitly teach you and teach your viewers how to do a master copy. Um, that is just brilliant. And you've also got um, things you can download to that extent as well. Now, kind of weird, but did you want to say anything about that particular approach, the copying the master?
I do. I do because I'm actually knee deep in the course right now that I'll be launching at the end of this month, and I've been working on it for about a year.
Wow.
And it was as a result of having so much feedback. I mean, I get flooded by emails of people asking me how to do master study even more in depth, or to do one-on-one coaching. I'm like, can you do a course? um, and that's coming out, and the course. The purpose of the course is really to teach us how to be better artists through developing observation skills. Um, so if you're creating something, the better you are at noticing what you notice and being able to, as I mentioned before, translate what you see onto paper. The art of getting the master's is a little bit different. It's more of almost like a reverse engineering, like you're taking something apart to figure out how it was put together. And so you have to put yourself in the mind of the master. It's like, why did they make that decision? Or how did they resolve that problem? And so you have to look at a piece differently when you're thinking about the fundamentals than when you were creating art. And so by taking their piece apart, you can put it back together at the stage when you want to create your original work. And basically the course that I'll be doing helps people kind of do that process. And then there's a bunch of different exercises to help sort of verify your assumptions. So for example, if you're studying a Frazetta, I'll put together a guiding questions. What are the things that are important to notice in order to make deductions about them? And then there are exercises that help you confirm that. I noticed that Frank Frazetta doesn't really use outlines all the time. Sometimes he uses the background to close the loop on some of the outlines and to create the shape. But just by looking at it, you might notice that there's something cool, but you can't confirm that observation until you apply it yourself. And so an exercise would be to copy it or trace it, or to count, okay, how many values did he use, and try to reproduce a value scale based on that. And then you would practice some of the textures that he used to do the transition and tones. And then you could go a step further and like copy the more complex parts of it, because redoing a complete piece is really time consuming, and I think that that's not the best use of your time. Like if it's going to take you 10 hours to copy a piece, where when it could take you like half an hour to actually just grasp how he came up with the solution, then you can apply that solution to your own project and spend the 10 hours there instead. And so in a gist, that's kind of like what the course is about.
As you were talking and I'm listening and I'm looking at your birds again, I still can't get over whispering ravens. It just dawned on me, and you don't use technical pens, do you? You use dip pens.
Yes, I do. That's because of Wrightson.
Wow.
My dad asked me once, he's like, why do you do it? It takes you that much longer to do a piece. And I said, because it's hard. Like it's the challenge of it. But it also does produce quite different lines than a fine liner or a repeatograph.
Is there any piece you're really proud of?
Yes, there is one because when I was wondering about that question, I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about my pieces. I do them, and then it's just kind of like I see them more of a learning process, and
Mm.
I evaluate my pieces with a very sort of what's the word, objective sort of eye, like, oh, I like how he did the form here, but the lighting there, and I analyze them, and then I gather notes, and then I use them to build my study guide for the next piece that I'll be doing or studying. But I do have one piece that I'm proud of. The very first Inktober that I did, I did a theme where I weaved in two characters for each day of the month. It was Brynhild and her companion Crumb, And Brynhild was one of the Valkyries. Well, the chief Valkyrie who would go collect the fallen warriors from the field and take them to Valhalla. And Crumb is a raven. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, yep, all good.
Oh, sorry, it just beeped. And so I weave them into the theme, and there's one illustration particularly of where she's kind of taking and she's exhausted. She's taking a nap under a tree, and Crumb is just sitting on her hip. He's guarding her, and he has a daisy in his beak. And that became my logo when I launched my business. So I just took cropped a little section of that illustration, and that became sort of like my whole business.
That is an awesome story. Wow. I've never done Inktober, largely because challenges for some reason really intimidate me. Boy, I'm going to cut that part out. Let me try again. Do you have any like advice for Inktober for those who maybe haven't done it or a little, worried about doing
Yeah,
it? Intimidating?
yeah. So due to feedback over the years, um, Jake Parker ended up releasing the prompts list a month early so
Hmm.
that people could get started a month early, at least, thinking about the prompts. And that would be my advice is to do the first stage of each right away, which is gather research. So if the prompt is I don't know, lamp.
Mhm.
Are you just going to draw a lamp, or are you going to do something interesting with it? And so basically start a folder and do research on all the prompts, and then do some thumbnails to figure out how you're going to put them together, and then allocate a time in your schedule of like how long how long do you want to spend on each illustration, and go from there and plan it out that way. And then the one note of caution I would say, the thing about Inktober is it's grown. I mean, they've got over a million people participating and showing their stuff, and a lot of the images that get posted aren't actually images that, and I don't know if I'm releasing trade secrets here, but they're not images that were done specifically for Inktober. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you'll see some complete pieces. I'm like, oh my God, that looks like it took 100 hours to complete. And it probably did. It's quite
Yeah.
possible that that's a professional artist. And that was something that he had in his portfolio. They just decided, you know, whoever's managing the account for Inktober that day chose that beautiful piece of art um, as the prompt. But that real people who are doing prompts, it's hard to spend more than 2 hours a day to
Goodness
complete a
gracious.
piece,
Yeah.
right? That's a lot of time. And so a piece that takes 2 hours will look different than a piece that took 100 hours. And it's just to keep that in mind, is really participate with the intention of participating, and just with the idea that this is going to help you be more consistent at drawing in the future, and it also gives you an opportunity to self-assess year to year. And so, for example, the first year I noted that it actually took me at least 5 hours per illustration to do them, but I had the luxury of time,
Mm.
and it wasn't a problem, and I wanted to do them to that level. The following year I also did a theme, and my illustrations were, I would say, at the same level in terms of output quality, but it took me only 2 hours to do them. And so I had improved in speed in my process of how I put them together and so forth. And then in the third year, I think I decided, I don't know if it was the third or fourth year, I decided to do them all in one day.
Oh
So
my.
I, I took only half an hour per prompt. I got up at like 3:30 in the morning, I think, and I drew till 11 o'clock at night. Actually, it's on YouTube, and I showed the process there, but it's doable. And the idea was that I wanted to participate in October, but I didn't have time to do it, and so I just used one day to do them all. And for me, my objective was to get better at quick sketching, and still get to participate. So my advice is do as much of the prep work ahead and have objectives that are relevant to your own learning goals. And don't worry about what everyone else is doing, because we don't know. we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how they put them together or if they're even illustrations that were done for the event.
Now I'm looking at your blog post um, from that challenge, the 31 prompts of October in one day. And what is up with this meerkat looking through a telephoto lens on a camera? That is awesome. Oh my goodness,
That
that's
was
adorable.
Yeah, I think each of them, some of the drawings were like, some of the prompts were really technical, like binoculars or camera or whatever. And, in half an hour, I'm not going to draw a technical object so precisely. So I thought, well, I'll divert the attention from the camera to something else that I'm better at drawing. So I can draw animals,
Yeah, that
easily because it's pretty organic. But to draw a precise, lens and all the little techie things, and so that's a strategy.
so your blog, did you start that before your YouTube channel? Was that part of your page?
No, so originally I started the website with the intention of like selling prints and
Mhm.
commissions and whatnot, and I quickly realized that wasn't really my jam. I didn't really enjoy, waiting in line at the post office and
Yeah.
ordering prints and whatnot. I mean, there's print on demand, but yeah, that's a whole other. Anyways, so I didn't have a blog at that time. I had the website for a year, then I started YouTube, and then a year later I started the blog as a result of um, comments and requests of people just asking for more content. So on the blog is it's more sequential, and there's more resources available. People are like, "Oh, what was that book?" or "What pen did you use?" Well, it's all on the blog, sometimes there's free templates that people can download and that kind of thing. So the blog just gives the opportunity to share more resources. And on YouTube, I don't like to do videos that are longer than 10 minutes. Try if I can't get my concept out within 10 minutes, then it's too long. Then that turns into a tutorial. And
You really are the trifecta. You are a talented, hardworking artist. You have a background in graphic design, and you know how to teach and learn. I mean, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but your blog, the quality of those entries, I would put it on par with James Gurney's. And James Gurney, of course, took
wow.
his early blog posts and turned them into his books, like the Color and Light.
Yeah. Yes.
As a
That's
selfish
sort of the
person,
idea.
I would love to see that, like big time. I would absolutely buy that in a heartbeat. Wow. Um,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear. Yeah, that is the plan, and of course, like the next step here is a Patreon. And it comes through. It's really is everything's driven by demand.
mhm.
Um, I wouldn't have thought of doing a blog or whatever. All these things are really time consuming, and I want to put out a good product. And I don't have the capacity to do one-on-one coaching. And the next best thing is Patreon, and so that will get launched. Probably at the end of the summer here.
I know what I take away from your art. But I take away storytelling more than anything and energy. There's so much energy in your artwork. What do you hope that viewers take away from the art that you make?
I would like them to be, yeah, inspired to want to try pen and ink. I would say because all the classic, like I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, he did all his sketches with the crow quill.
Yeah.
All the great masters, they were proficient with ink, and if you truly understand, if you can do something in black and white and then move to your color will be exceptional after that. Just being able to express in monochrome, and then yeah, I think that's sort of the look at my art and think of it as, well, I'll start. This gives me a place to start, I guess, is what I'd like people to see when they look at my art.
Is there any artists or movements that you may not have mentioned or that you want to reemphasize that have been particularly influential for you?
I do actually. There artists on YouTube, teaching artists. There's two in particular. Alfonso Dunn, who is kind of like the granddaddy of teaching pen and ink on YouTube, and another. He's more of a generalist, like he does everything acrylic, watercolor, but he also does pen and ink quite well. Matt, I think his last name is Fussell, but he goes by the virtual instructor.
Hmm.
And he's an amazing instructor, and I used to, when I started drawing again, I thought, "Oh, I'll take courses," but I'll start on YouTube to get sort of like samples of what is it that I like to draw, or how do I wanna approach this, and it was those 2 in particular. I did, like, all their tutorials, and they really sort of revived my desire to grow as an artist.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. What advice would you, and okay, okay, okay. For some reason that has nothing to do with copy and paste, I wrote, what advice would you give to young artists exploring abstract art? You are free to answer that or just answer the general question of exploring art today.
Yeah, no, I answered that one. And my advice was to study the masters and to do research on the masters that they had studied, and that would be my answer, because it's any type of medium or genre that you're interested in, look to the source.
Love it. Well, that's my questions. Do you have, you can say anything at this point. You can push out your products. You've got some incredibly valuable lessons through, I think, Skillshare and maybe Udemy. And in addition to your webpage, you can also talk conspiracy theory if you want, or anything. Anything you want
No,
is your time.
that's it. I think I got it all out.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Canvas. Deep dives with inspiring artists. Brought to you by The Most Honest Thing. Fine Art by John Cooper. I'm incredibly grateful for your continued support and hope you enjoyed today's insightful conversation. Stay tuned for our next captivating episode of Beyond the Canvas. In the meantime, be sure to explore my Substack, John Cooper Bard, Substack.com. Every Sunday, I share my museum mishaps, art opinions, and the passionate and flawless, and the highs and lows of my artistic journey. It's all part of the most honest thing. Fine art, John Cooper.
I have to ask if you've ever drawn a boa constrictor having eaten an elephant.
That's funny you asked that.